Welcome to Wine Wanderings. Today I'm featuring Meaghan Frank, fourth generation and vice president of the Dr. Konstantin Frank Winery in the Finger Lakes wine region in upstate New York. Welcome, Meaghan.
Oh, thank you so much, Tricia. Thank you.
Can you tell us about the pioneering aspect to Dr. Konstantin Frank Wines, your role in the organization, your background, and the scope of the wines you produce?
Sure. Oh, yes. This is a lot of info. So to begin, the winery has a very interesting history, and it really begins with my great-grandparents. Um, Specifically my great-grandfather, and his name sort of adorns all of our bottles. His name was Konstantin. He grew up in Odessa, Ukraine, and from a really young age became interested in grape growing and winemaking. He actually made his first wine when he was 15 from his father's vineyard. He had a hobby vineyard in their backyard. And this sort of love of the vine took him to earn his PhD in viticulture. So he sort of dreamed of being a researcher, a professor, an experimenter. He had a really strong sort of science sort of background, and he managed a very large estate in Ukraine, in Odessa, and was really looking at different techniques for managing the European varieties, the species Vitis vinifera in a cold climate. So that was very critical. The winters were very harsh there, to the point where they would actually have to bury every single vine to protect it from the cold. So all of this sort of intel and know-how would prepare him for coming to the Finger Lakes one day. So the family fled actually World War II. So it was Konstantin, his wife Eugenia, and three children came to New York. Konstantin, he had 35 years of grape growing experience in Eastern Europe, spoke six languages, unfortunately, not a word of English. So had a really challenging time basically starting over. So the family was living in New York City. Konstantin was working as a dishwasher and learning some English. And someone mentioned that the Finger Lakes is not far away, and they were, they had vines there and they were making wine. And that sort of piqued his interest. And he he knew that there was an experimental station here, which is still sort of our premier research institution in the Finger Lakes, now called Cornell Agritech. So he came to Geneva basically with his PhD in hand and really wanted to be here in this region. And something that was very off-putting to him, and so it just didn't seem quite right, is the thought that vinifera was not possible in this region of New York, that it's too cold, that vinifera doesn't survive. And when he heard this from researchers, he said, that can't be. In Odessa, he would say your spit would freeze before it hit the ground in the winter. It was so cold. And they had all of these managing techniques, for growing vines and growing grapes in a cold climate. And he really set out to kind of prove everybody wrong. And the secret to his success was the grafting technique. So, grafting cold hardy American rootstock with the European variety, and that avoided the pest phylloxera, which was really the crux of the issue of why the European vines were not surviving in the eastern United States. So, sort of there began his quest. You can imagine a man and he was in his early 60s when he had his first vintage here on our farm. He basically wanted to produce the best wine, from these very high quality grapes. And he really felt that America sort of gave him a second chance. And he would say, you Americans deserve only excellent. And these grapes are excellent, and I will make an excellent wine. And for him, it went way beyond, starting a winery. It was almost like a crusade, to plant these very high quality grape varieties. And essentially, he started an experiment station here. He had over 66 different vinifer varieties from his start when he purchased the farm in 1957 until his passing in 1985, and really was very welcoming with this knowledge. So invited area vineyard managers, winemakers, from Virginia, from, Ohio, Pennsylvania, all across Maryland, all across the Eastern Seaboard. And they would come, they would learn the grafting technique and take that back to their home state. And that's what he dreamed of, as sort of like the flourishing of a quality revolution in the American wine industry. He also started the American Wine Society in 1967, which today is the largest consumer group for wine in the United States, and really believed that this was like his duty, that this was his job was to introduce the vinifer varieties. And my grandfather, Willie, took over after Konstantin passed away in the 1980s, and Konstantin had spent his whole life in, research and experimentation and science. And, he really laid the groundwork for what varieties worked really well in our region and maybe what varieties didn't have a future. Now, this was obviously in the 80s when there wasn't a lot of acceptance of more esoteric varieties. It was Chardonnay, Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, and he was planting things like Ferment, Pedro Jimenez, grapes that we still have today, like Rickettseteli and Cepravi, Georgian varieties. But out of the 66, it was important for my grandfather to sort of narrow it down to about 20. And he began more of a business-minded approach to the winery, also started a traditional method sparkling winery, which is right next door, which is still operational from our first vintage in 1985. And so very much also an ambassador for New York wines. He was going all across the country, even internationally, and he talked about it like it was missionary work. He was very adamant that New York and that specifically the Finger Lakes was really a very high quality, cool climate region that had the potential to produce some of the best wines in America. So that was really an important time, for the region, and we saw a lot of growth during that period. In the late 70s, you had the Farm Winery Act, which was really a key piece of legislation that opened up basically any grower in New York and in the Finger Lakes could start their own winery. So all of the fruit that they were growing, that they were selling, they could just open their doors with very little sort of red tape issues with opening a winery. So you saw a huge flourishing of wineries, and today we have over 150 in the Finger Lakes. And then my father started the winery in 1993 and added on a second brand called Salmon Run, which today makes up between 30 to 50% of our overall production. So it's still a really important part of our sort of catalog of wines. And Salmon Run was a great way to increase the presence and also increase the quality of the Dr. Frank line of wines, because a lot of the grapes we're going into Salmon Run are purchased from local growers within the Finger Lakes. So it also has helped us sort of continue to develop relationships within our community here of growers. And also we were able to get more wine, out there in the market. And it's a very important sort of wholesale brand for us. My father's also been in charge of really expanding our vineyard acreage. So we have vineyards also on the east side of Seneca Lake, in addition to our home farm, which is on the west side of Cuca Lake. So a really key sort of part in increasing the quality and also the quantity. And I've worked with my dad for the last 11 years, and that's been wonderful. And he's given me a lot of autonomy at a young age, and I appreciate that. So it wasn't the same for him, with my grandfather. So I think he's taken a lot of those lessons to heart. And yeah, so my background is I became interested in wine. You maybe would expect from a young age, since I grew up in the business, but it wasn't really the case. It was very much like when I was in college, I became interested in wine because I was in an agriculture school at Cornell. So a lot of the prerequisites for, science classes, I was able to take viticulture or enology classes. And while it wasn't part of my initial, dream, I guess, for what I thought I would be doing, it almost was better that I came to it on my own terms, and to have my dad's support was really helpful. So I moved to Australia after I graduated, got my graduate degree in wine business, and really loved my time in South Australia. Met a lot of amazing winemakers and family business owners, and just had a really sort of cementing experience with being wanting to be in the wine industry. And then upon returning, I got a graduate degree in enology, because I felt that was important, for me moving forward in the business. And yeah, so today I manage the day-to-day operations, with a heavier focus on sales, marketing, and wine production. And we have an awesome team, many individuals who have been with us for 2 or 3 generations of my family. So it feels, we're at a really exciting time, within our company, but also within the region at large. So that was a very long introduction, Tricia,
But it
but
was but it was good because you covered a lot of areas and you have a extraordinary background for the fourth generation of this family, this very flourishing wine business, which, by the way, for our readers, you guys were selected by Wine Spectator, one of the top 100 wines in the world.
mm,
So that's a pretty incredible, recognition for your winery.
yeah, and I think it's as sort of the climate is changing, for us, we're producing a lot of Northern European, wine grapes, so Riesling is our sort of number 1, but a lot of aromatic varieties, Gruner Veltliner, Gewürztraminer, Muscat-Étonnel, Pinot Gris, like a really incredible array of aromatic varieties, and also sparkling. Sparkling is, like, a fantastic category for our region. There's a lot of different styles, we have producers doing pet nats, some that are doing, like, carbonated styles, specifically with Riesling, but the real magic, I think, is the traditional method, sparklings coming out of the Finger Lakes, and I feel we're really primed, being that we're in such a cool climate, to be sort of the go-to cool climate region, in the US for aromatic varieties and also sparklings.
I know if England can grow sparkling wine now
Right?
because of climate change, certainly you can do it easily in
Yep.
upstate New York. Anyway, thank you for joining us on Wine Wanderings.
Absolutely, Trisha. Thank you.